Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our second session for Sunday morning of National Safety Month 2021. My name's Cody Calder. I'm the Head of Safety at RAAus, and very excited to announce our next speaker that we've got today. But before we kick things off, I'd just like to thank all of our National Safety Month sponsors for sponsoring National Safety Month. We have over $10,000 worth of giveaways throughout the month of October, and we couldn't do it if it wasn't for our Safety Month sponsors. I'd like to give a particular shout out to Flight Safety Solutions, who is a gold sponsor of National Safety Month and the sponsor of today's seminar series that we have running. Flight Safety Solutions is obviously the presenter for today's session as well, and you can get 10% off by mentioning National Safety Month by going to their website, flightsafetysolutions.com.au. But I'm sure Paul will have more information on that very shortly. Just before we get started, on the right-hand side of your screen, there should be a Q&A panel. In there, you can throw any questions that you've got for Paul throughout the session. And he'll be able to answer those either throughout or at the end of today's presentation. There is also a handouts tab there, and Paul has put up a handout that people can download for further information as well. If that chat panel, that Q&A panel is not open on the right-hand side of your screen, then there should be a blue chat button in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, which will open that panel for you to be able to put those questions in there. So, on that note, I'll welcome in today's presenter. Good morning, Paul.
Morning, Cody. How are you, mate?
Yeah, good. Thanks. Yourself?
Yeah, battling on, mate. It's good.
That's the way. Thank you very much for joining us today, and I'll hand over and I'll touch base with you shortly. Enjoy.
No worries. Thanks, mate. Oh, good morning, everybody. Paul Strike here from Flight Safety Solutions and Strike Aviation Training. Just happy to have a chat with people to let them know a few things about maintenance data and where to find it and how important it is to ensure that your aircraft is well maintained, and more importantly, to protect the value of your aeroplane by documenting the maintenance so that the aeroplane can retain its value, and also make it a lot easier for maintainers to find history on it. So if there is a requirement to do troubleshooting, we can see what's happened in the past. So we'll make a start, and Cody, can you just confirm that that screen is now live?
It is indeed, yes.
Okay, thanks. So I'm going to try to keep the regulatory references to a very bare minimum, but they are a functional part of what we're doing. So maintenance data is a very important part of aviation, and everybody who's involved with aviation has a part to play in understanding where maintenance data can be found and how to use it. So there's we split it into three types. We've got the owner-operator, so the aircraft owner or a flight school, the maintainer, and the pilot. There's three types of aviators we're going to talk about. Now, with respect to the owner-operator, CAR 41, this RAAus Ops Manual and the Tech Manual is very clear that the owner-operator is the person who is ultimately responsible to ensure the aircraft is maintained as appropriate. This basically means the owner-operator needs to know what maintenance needs to be done and when it needs to be done by. We're going to expand on these as we go through. The maintainer under CAR 42 or the RAAus Tech Manual is responsible for how the maintenance is done. So it's very clear we understand the responsibility. The pilot, whether you're the owner-operator flying your own aeroplane or a pilot who rents an aircraft from a flight school, you're responsible under CASAR 61, the Ops Manual and the Tech Manual, to make sure all the maintenance has been performed before you actually accept the aeroplane and go flying. So we'll break this down and we'll start expanding on these things. the owner-operator needs to advise the maintainer what maintenance needs to be done. So what we need to ensure is that the owner has a clear understanding of the regulatory requirements for how to maintain the aeroplane. And I will explain more about it in detail shortly, but it's not the maintainer's job to determine what maintenance needs to be done. It's the owner's. So this maintenance, what maintenance needs to be done is in accordance with the nominated maintenance program, and we'll expand this very shortly. The maintainer is responsible for how the maintenance is performed. So once the owner advises the maintainer this is the work that needs to be done on the aeroplane, then the maintainer is to ensure that the maintenance performed on the aircraft is performed in accordance with the applicable standards of airworthiness. This is the how it's done. It's maintained appropriately. The pilot is responsible for checking that the maintenance has been performed, and this is through for registered aircraft currently through a maintenance release, and you need to check Part 1 and Part 2 of the maintenance release. And there is another document that owners and pilots and maintainers will be familiar with for sure, is a document called the run-out sheet or the due list. And this is a document that should list every scheduled maintenance activity that's applicable to the aircraft. And it should have when it was last done, what the period or interval of the maintenance action is, and when it was next due. So you need to ensure that everything is performed before you accept the aircraft to go flying. At the end of the day, if you're renting an aircraft from a flight school and you're not sure, just ask. You might be the pilot, but you're responsible for your own ass and also the ass of your passengers that are in there. So the question is, are you going to check it or are you going to chance it? So if you understand where the maintenance, what maintenance is due, when it was due, and how it was performed, you'll have a comfort level in knowing that the aircraft is maintained appropriately. So each aviator needs to pay their part in the maintenance safety circle. So if everybody plays their part in ensuring continuing airworthiness, then the aeroplane's got the best chance of being safe and certainly compliant. So the way that the maintenance safety circle works is that manufacturers will build an aircraft to a standard. The owner selects and monitors an appropriate maintenance program about what needs to be done. The maintainer performs the maintenance in accordance with the appropriate standards or how the maintenance is done. The pilot ensures all maintenance has been performed before flight. Now, if there are any problems, we need to record it by accurate and visible records and a good reporting culture. And this means that we can then feed that information back to the manufacturer, who can then make modifications or amendments or issue alert bulletins, which then the owner should be notified of. Then he should tell the maintainer to ensure that the pilot has a safe aeroplane. If the pilot doesn't have a safe aeroplane, then we should report it so the manufacturer understands that something needs to be done. So this is the maintenance safety circle, and it's to try and maintain a good flight safety. So we don't want anybody to break the chain in the maintenance safety circle. If any one of these things doesn't work, then we're compromising flight safety. So let's have a look at them in details now. So the owner-operator needs to know what maintenance needs to be done. So if we look at a couple of Tecnam aircraft here, well, there's two Tecnam P92 Echoes, and they look the same, but they will both have different, they'll both have continuing airworthiness maintenance requirements. And this is because of the following. They're different because they were built at different times. One was built in 2005 and one was built in 2000. So they have different ages. They have both different flight hours. They have different landings accredited to them. They both have different equipment. Some might have just steam-driven instruments. Some might have EFIS. They're different operating types. Somebody might purely operate on bitumen runways. Somebody might operate in the bush. Somebody might have it for private use, and somebody will use it in the flying school. And they're operating in different environments. So one might be at Alice Springs, and the other one might be on the coast at Maroochydore or Sunshine Coast. So the corrosion issues or the aging aircraft issue is going to be greater for the one on the Sunshine Coast rather than the one in Alice Springs. So there will be all these details that we're going to talk about, such as service bulletins and maintenance programs. Somebody needs to be on top of what's changing and what's being updated. Now, if the owner-operator is either not interested or doesn't have the time, create a relationship with your maintainer. But you need to understand that the maintainer is not the person who is responsible for ensuring the aeroplane is maintained as it should be, what needs to be done. However, a responsible maintainer will not release an airworthy aircraft. And what we find too often is that an owner will come in and say, oh, mate, I'm just the owner. I really don't know what's got to go on. You work it out for me. So the maintainer will do a whole bunch of research to make sure there's no current service bulletins outstanding or no airworthiness directives, and do the best job they can to ensure that the owner's aircraft is safe and compliant. Where a few problems happen is that the maintainer's sometimes spent many hours at night because he's twisting spanners during the day, and he'll give the owner a bill for some research time, and the owner doesn't want to pay for research time because you weren't working on my aeroplane. What the owner needs to understand is the maintainer's doing the owner's responsibility. They're doing the job for the owner, so they should be paid for their time. So we encourage owners, when we do maintenance on aeroplanes for owners, we encourage the owner to come and take part in the maintenance so they can learn about what's under the floor or what's behind that panel. And here's a list of service bulletins and why it's so important. So being part of it, take an active role. So let's have a look at a whole bunch of places. Unfortunately, there's not just one little booklet you can pick up and it tells you everything. We've got a list of places that we need to visit, and not just once, we need to visit them regularly. So there's the civil aviation orders, and we're going to break these down into individual places, individual subjects in a second. Airworthiness directives, RAIs, airworthiness notices, maintenance programs, service bulletins, letters and instructions, modifications, and then we've got to try and keep track of all of this stuff. So let's have a look at it now. Civil aviation orders. CAO 100.5. Now, I know that in PDPs in the past, and Jill and Darren and Jared have been talking a lot about CAO 100.5 tasks to everybody. I remember a PDP in Tasmania a while ago, and Jill said, if you want the freedom of a weight upgrade and you want controlled airspace, you need to have CAO 100.5 tasks done. And they're very important. So we're talking about altimeter checks, airspeed indicators, fuel gauges, altimeters every 2 years, airspeed indicators 4 years, fuel gauges calibrated every 4 years, transponders and encoders every 2 years, and composite or wooden propellers every 6 months. Now, these are mandatory tasks for registered and recreational aircraft. And it's really, really important. I'll just give you a couple of examples about why they are so important. Altimeter check. If you don't have the right QNH and your altimeter is out of calibration, you could say to the oncoming traffic, hey, I'm at 5,000 feet. You stay there and I'll climb to 5,500. Now, if you've got an error in your altimeter, he might have 5,000 feet as well, and then you're not actually providing any separation. That's very important. Airspeed indicators. Well, if you don't have the right airspeed, then when you're approaching to land, you're not going to have the appropriate airspeed. Fuel gauges. Well, everybody knows Cessna fuel gauges are not reliable. Tecnam fuel gauges aren't reliable. They're an indication, but it's a regulatory requirement to have them checked. Transponders, mode S or mode C, it doesn't matter. They need to be calibrated for the same reason as altimeters, so that it's reporting the appropriate information so that air traffic control can provide separation where required. Composite wooden propellers, every 6 months, these propellers will change with the weather. We're pretty lucky in Australia, as we don't have the swing of temperatures like they do in North America or Europe. But every 6 months, the CAO 100.5 task says you need to retorque and inspect the hub. And we quite regularly get our wooden propellers on the Tecnam that the torque on the bolts change from winter to summer. So if your bolts aren't tight, then you're going to get play in the propeller, which is going to wear the propeller hub. So it creates maintenance problems. Airworthiness directives. CASAR Part 39. Airworthiness directives are mandatory, and they are sometimes amended. So not every airworthiness directive published is going to be applicable to your aircraft. So you have to look at each airworthiness directive individually. And sometimes they're amended because of the maintenance safety cycle. If people perform an AD and it's not actually the best fix, it could have continuing requirements to change the maintenance action, which means that you may have to revisit the repair. And whilst it might be found on one model of aeroplane, after a period of time, the same problem might become apparent in other models. So on an initial issue, you might not be applicable, but a subsequent amendment might include your aircraft. So you have to stay on top of it. When you perform an airworthiness directive, an entry needs to be made in your records. And it's the maintainer's requirement, his responsibility to ensure that he's written in your logbook. But as the owner, your requirement is to ensure that that list is compliant and up to date. So it's applicable and up to date. They're mandatory, and you can find this information on the CASA website. On their homepage, on the left-hand side, there is a button, Airworthiness Directives. They do have folders set out by aircraft type. A lot of light sport aircraft are not in there because CASA does not keep track of airworthiness issues for light sport aircraft. However, Rotax engines have a folder all for themselves. And so if you operate an aeroplane with a Rotax engine, you're required to make sure that you are compliant with the airworthiness directives for a Rotax engine. Case in point was the circlip on the needle valve in the carburetors recently. The circlip was breaking and falling inside the carburetor, which was causing problems with the engine running. So this can cause an engine failure and subsequent emergency landing and potential accident or incident. So light sport aircraft, RAOs issue airworthiness notices, and they're of the same value as an airworthiness directive. The RAO's technical manual says that they are mandatory. However, you need to read through all the airworthiness notices to see if they're applicable to your aircraft, your engine, propeller, equipment, or your type of operation. So they are mandatory, and they've been brought about via the maintenance safety cycle where somebody has reported that there's been a problem. And we'll talk about a couple of those in a second. They are mandatory. You can find them if you log into your RAAUS member portal under safety, you can report an occurrence. We'll talk about that in a minute. But maintenance, under the maintenance tab, there's airworthiness notices, advisory bulletins, and a whole bunch of other information. And this includes pilots as well. Get on there and have a look, because if you're flying a Tecnam or a Texan or a Sling or any other aeroplane, get on there and find out what's happening with these aeroplanes so that you're aware that there is a potential problem, and you can check that while you're doing your pre-flight, or ask your school, hey, what have you done about this airworthiness bulletin or airworthiness notice? Maintenance programs. All right, so this is what needs to be done. You need to do the CAO 100.5 tasks. They're all published under the CASA website. Airworthiness directives and RAAUS airworthiness notices. You need to go through every one of those and see if it's applicable to your aircraft. So we're starting to build a list here. Maintenance programs. The owner-operator needs to nominate what system of regularly scheduled maintenance tasks you will use in order to comply with your responsibility. Now, for registered aircraft, there are 3 choices on what maintenance programs you can use. You can use the manufacturer's maintenance program, and that's going to be found in the aircraft maintenance manual. Most manufacturers will give aircraft owners free access to this data. However, some manufacturers will charge you for the privilege, just so that owners understand where a maintainer's coming from. If you own a Cessna, for example, for a maintainer, a maintenance shop, to have a complete suite of Cessna manuals from Cessna, they're going to pay around about $8,000 a year for the suite of manuals. That's before you even bring your aeroplane in. So it's very important about maintenance data, but sometimes there is a cost associated with it. So you need to be aware of that. Another program is CASA Schedule 5, which is what a lot of registered aeroplanes operate under. Now, CASA Schedule 5 was brought about many years ago when people started importing aeroplanes that didn't have any maintenance program in their maintenance manual. So CASA designed a program so that people could maintain those aeroplanes, and they made it available for everybody to choose. The only problem with that is it's pretty generic. It covers most things, but you may have equipment on your aeroplane that does not fall under the umbrella of what CASA Schedule 5 covers. So you need to make sure to have a talk to your maintainer and say, if you do Schedule 5, will it cover my Dynon, or will it cover my Skyview or G5 or G3X, or will it cover all of this stuff? If I put a coffee percolator in there, does it cover that? And make sure that everything in the aeroplane is covered for continuing airworthiness. The last choice is a system of maintenance. This is a very time-consuming process where you can design your own maintenance program. However, CASA will not entertain anybody designing their own system of maintenance unless you've been operating the aeroplane for many years and have a very specific system knowledge about the aircraft. So that's usually not a choice. For recreational aircraft, LSAs, you don't have a choice. You are only, as detailed in the tech manual, you can only use the maintenance program by the manufacturer. You cannot deviate from that. If you have a problem if you find defects that are not covered underneath the maintenance program, and a classic example is we had an axle failure on one of our Tecnams due to cracking, and there was no instructions for continuing airworthiness for inspecting the axle by any means whatsoever. So we reported it through the OMS. We talked to the distributor of the aircraft, who talked to the manufacturer, and Flight Safety Solutions came up with a proposed 2,500 landing inspection, remove the axle, get it tested by NDT, and then put it back in service for another 2,500 landings, so that we can sort of like keep a track on how wear and tear is going. For home-built kit or experimental aircraft, so if you've got a 19 registered aeroplane, or you've got an RV or something like that, the legislation considers you are the manufacturer, and you can determine your own continuing airworthiness program. But you must remember you're responsible for the lives of the people who fly in the aircraft, as well as the general public. So service bulletins, letters, and instructions. As with the maintenance circle of safety, the manufacturer of your aircraft continually receives feedback. That's why filling in the OMS is very important, so we can collect trend data and look at what's happening out there. If there's enough reports of something failing, then the manufacturer will create a fix. They're obliged by regulation to maintain and support their aircraft. I know there are a number of aeroplanes out there, and the Drifter is one of them. The manufacturer is no longer in business, and there's a group of guys who are collaborating and doing the best they can to keep all of them informed, and talking about how we're going to address the problems they find whilst they're flying the aeroplane. It's the continuing airworthiness. So those people who are, they're sort of labelled orphan aircraft, that's a term, aeroplanes that no longer have a manufacturer's support. If it's a registered aeroplane, manufacturers, if nobody has the type certificate, if nobody has responsibility for the manufacturer or the continuing airworthiness of the aeroplane, then they're not allowed to fly. And the Victor Air Tour is a classic example of that as well, because the manufacturer went out of business, and the Victor group, they formed a body and they acquired the type certificate, and they assumed the responsibility of the continuing airworthiness. And that's a great example of where like-minded people with a love for the same aeroplane all band together, and they all report problems, and then they get an engineer to create a fix. It's all very open and honest, and it's a great way to do business. So report via the OMS or the CASA SDR system. Some manufacturers will not amend their maintenance manuals. Now, the Decathlon and American Champion aircraft built before 1980 are classic examples, because that was built by a company called Bellanca, and they went out of business in 1980. When we bought our Decathlon that we use for upset recovery training, the manual was last amended in 1980, and they provide American Champion bought the type certificate in 1990 and then continued to build these great airplanes. They don't amend the manuals, they'll issue service bulletins. So continuing airworthiness will not be reflected in the maintenance manual, although that is the document where you get your maintenance program from and how the maintainer can use it, how to maintain. But service bulletins, when people report defects or problems, they will issue a service bulletin. So that's a place where you need to visit. If you're an aircraft owner, you need to bookmark and visit regularly your manufacturer's service bulletin pages, so that you can see if something new has come up to do with the maintenance of your aeroplane, because this is how you're going to keep it safe and compliant. Manufacturers have a legal and a moral responsibility to ensure the aircraft owners are informed and up to date. Now, the problem is that Registered aircraft are built under a FAR 23 approval. That's why they're registered aircraft. However, light sport aircraft do not have to meet the same manufacturing criteria as a registered aircraft. And some manufacturers are way better than other manufacturers in sharing and providing information. Kiev propellers are, thanks to Foxbat, who published Kiev propeller information. When we bought our Foxbat, we couldn't find any data on the Kiev site. It wasn't until we had a talk with Peter Harlow and they found the information and published it. That provided us the information we needed to ensure the propeller was maintained appropriately. So you need to be very careful about what aircraft you're going to choose to buy so that you have the good support, the appropriate support. Getting parts is a problem. We've had problems with some manufacturers in Europe taking up to a year to get parts. You don't buy an aeroplane for $100 and something thousand or even $50,000 and then have it sit in the hangar. We don't want people to scuttle off down to Bunnings Aerospace and buy parts just because I can't get the parts fast enough. It needs to be appropriate parts, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So the aircraft owner is responsible for assessing each individual service bulletin. There might be a list. So you go to the Foxbat website again, use that as an example. They have a list for all of the Foxbats, ALS 22 and the Vixen and the Kelpie. And these are all of the service bulletins that are applicable to that model, that type of aircraft. But as we talked about earlier, they might say in there, oh, this service bulletin's applicable to aircraft that have reached more than 2,000 hours. Well, if you haven't reached 2,000 hours, then it might not be applicable, but it might be a good idea to go and have it looked at because it might be wearing a bit faster on your aeroplane due to the environment that you're operating in. If you're on smooth runways and it's an undercarriage service bulletin, then you're probably okay. But if you're operating off strip, then you might have accelerated wear. And this is why it's so important to report that. So if you looked at that service bulletin and said to Foxbat, hey, I've only got 1,000 hours on my aeroplane, but I've got the same problem as the 2,000 hour limit on the service bulletin, then they can then review that and amend it so that people don't have undercarriage failures. And then you can provide these service bulletins as part of the work pack that you instruct the maintainer so he knows what work he's got to do. So we've talked about a couple of examples of that. Manufacturer's website is where to go. And it's very important to stay up to date with that. Again, this comes back to it's the owner's responsibility to ensure that the maintainer is told what to do. It's not the maintainer's responsibility to do that, but if the maintainer does it, it's because he doesn't want to release an aeroplane that is not airworthy. And as such, he should be paid for it. So if you don't want a big bill and you don't want him to research it, then you better go and research it yourself. RAL's aircraft, adherence to all manufacturers' service bulletins is mandatory. So on registered aeroplanes, they may issue mandatory service bulletins or they may issue at owner's convenience service bulletins. For RAL's aircraft, if you come under the applicability paragraph for a service bulletin, it's applicable to A22 LS Foxbat serial numbers 1 to 500, and you've got 501, you've still got to comply with it. Here's the kicker. This is the reality of the world. If you don't want to do the service bulletins, then that's fine. That's your choice. But you need to defend your decision to an auditor, regulator, or to a coroner if your aircraft is involved in an accident. So it's all cheese and crackers until there's an accident. But if an accident happens and it's because there was an undercarriage failure and there was a service bulletin about it and you didn't comply with it, you need to answer why you didn't comply with it. Modifications. Registered and light sport aircraft are not permitted to be modified unless the modification is approved by the manufacturer via a letter of approval, which is listed down the bottom there. Manufacturer might have options for leather seats or EFIS versus steam. That might be those options. A supplemental type certificate is somebody has designed a modification to an aeroplane and they think that that modification will be popular and they could sell it. So they'll go and get that engineered and approved by somebody, a CASA delegate or a FAA delegate, and then they can sell that modification because it's been tested and approved. However, if you go, you know what, I just want to put a coffee percolator or a big screen TV in the back seat of the aeroplane so the kids can watch something, I can just go and get an approved CASA delegate and say, I want to do this. He'll do up an engineering drawing and an instructions for continuing airworthiness and give you an approval for that, but that's only for your aeroplane. And the same with light sport aircraft. If you want to put something on the dash that is not a standard fit, you can ask the manufacturer for a letter of approval to have that installed. If you don't have any of those, you're not permitted to do the modification. This is very important, guys and girls. This improves, hey, I read this thing about this really great propeller. I think I'm going to go and stick it on my sling because they reckon it's going to be really good, and I'll just go out and I'll try it and see how it goes. You're a test pilot and you are not flying your airplane in accordance with the rules, the regulations, and the rule of safety. It includes putting anything in the aeroplane. The rule of thumb is if the change is a permanent one, you need an approval. So let's say you want to put a USB outlet in your aeroplane. If your airplane's got a cigarette lighter adapter, you can go and get one of those ones from Jaycar, stick it in the cigarette lighter adapter and use it. But you cannot go and get a panel mount USB and then drill a hole in the dash and then wire it in without an approval. You can go and get a letter of approval. Hey, I'll take a photo of your dash. I want to put a USB adapter there. Send it to the distributor for the aircraft. He'll send it to the factory, and the factory will say, yeah, as long as you put a fuse in it, that's good. One of our students bought a Cessna 170, and that was the second flight. We just landed and taxied off the runway, and we got smoke in the cockpit. We immediately isolated all of the electrical system. Somebody had put one of those triple cigarette lighter adapter bars from Super Cheap Auto on the dash and wired it directly to the positive bus with no circuit protection whatsoever, and had wired it in such a way that the wire had chafed through onto the metal frame and shorted it out, and we could have had an electrical fire in that aeroplane. So we subsequently removed it. These are the things, if you do a backyard fix, if you're not on the ground and you have an electrical fire in the air because you've done a modification because it looks really cool, you're going to have problems. So let's have a look at our airplane. How do we create a work pack, or how do we create a scheduled maintenance pack for our aeroplane? Well, first thing we do is we go to CAO 100.5 at the CASA website, and we look at all the CAO 100.5 tasks that are in Appendix 1, and we go through it. Now, that includes things like oxygen bottles, air bottles. It's got emergency exits. It's got a whole bunch of stuff that will not be applicable to your aeroplane. However, you need to go through each one of those and just tick off the ones, okay, that's applicable to mine, that's applicable to mine, and make a list there. Airworthiness directives, CASA website. Like I said, Rotax engines have a folder on the CASA website for ADs. They are mandatory. You must comply with them. So you need to read every single road tax airworthiness directive, because it might be applicable to 915. So you might have a 912 ULS in our TechNam. So anything that's 915, 914, 914 turbo, not applicable to us. I don't need to comply with it, but you need to document that you are not applicable and why you're not applicable, because that's not the model of our aeroplane. RAOS airworthiness notices, RAOS website and your member portal. Maintenance programs. Go to your manufacturer, get the manufacturer's manuals, the aircraft maintenance manual and the parts catalog. The illustrated parts catalog needs to be an exploded view that identifies every nut, bolt, washer, split pin that is in your aeroplane. If it doesn't, then you really don't have the appropriate information to maintain your aeroplane with the correct parts. But it might cost you, but the cost is insignificant in the overall scheme of things. Service bulletins, letters and instructions. Most manufacturers will publish free of charge on their website all of the service bulletins. Get on there regularly and make sure that there's nothing that's come due since you last looked at it. And a good time to do that is when you're going in for your 100-hour annual inspection. However, be aware that they might issue a service bulletin, or an airworthiness directive might come out 2 days after your maintenance and say, before further flight, check your seatbelt's okay. So you don't want to fly around for 11 months and 2 weeks with dodgy seatbelts. Modifications, some manufacturers list a whole bunch of modifications or letters of approval that are already pre-approved, and you can go like a shopping list and put big tires on or put EFA screen in. They're already pre-made. Do it in accordance with the manufacturer's support. And then we've got to find a way of keeping track of it all. Let's have a touch on this safe reporting culture again. RAOS occurrence management system. Get on there. If you have a immediately reportable incident, RAOS OMS is linked to the ATSB, so you do meet your regulatory requirement to report that matter to ATSB by simply filling in the OMS. So thank you, RAOS, for doing that. That's helped streamline that process. That's really good. So report any incident or accident via this. Also report your defects so that RAOS can keep a track of what's occurring out there. If things are breaking on your aeroplane, probably other people's aeroplanes are breaking the same, and we want to see if there's a trend there, to see if there's a problem with the manufacturing process or the way the aeroplane's built. Report a hazard. If you see something like the airfield operator just put a crane at the end of the runway but didn't tell anybody, report that hazard to RAOS. And they'll phone up the aircraft operator, the aerodrome operator, and say, hey, you better let everybody know, put out a NOTAM or something about a crane on the end of the runway. So let's have a look at, I want any of aircraft owners out there who are listening in, or operators. We've got 3 simple questions. It's called the Breezy Log test. To see how well you know what your scheduled maintenance plan is. How are you up to date? So the first question is, if you didn't flick through your logbook, how do you know when your altimeter was last calibrated? Now, we know that altimeters need to be calibrated every 2 years. We quite regularly do pre-purchase inspections on aircraft, and that's one of the questions we'll ask just coming straight through the door. When's your altimeter next due? And the reply is normally, it's in the logbook somewhere. Okay, well, if it's in the logbook, when was it last done? I don't know, I'd have to check. Well, if you don't know when it was last done, how do you know when it's next due? It makes it a bit difficult. Without searching through the logbook, do you know if you've complied with all the airworthiness directives that are applicable? You need to be on top of that because airworthiness directives are to correct failures or imminent failures in aircraft that could create a safety hazard. So we need to make sure that we're up to date. And without searching through the logbook for the last entry, do you know when the next magneto inspection or rubber hose replacement is due? Again, this is keeping a handle on what needs to be done and when it needs to be done by. So if you're not on top of that and you have to flick through a whole bunch of pages in your logbook to find an entry, then your maintainer's going to have to flick through the pages to see when it was last done. Some maintainers, we'll talk about different types of ways of tracking maintenance in a second, but the maintainer, if you don't want to pay your maintainer to do the research for them. So why performing scheduled maintenance can save money or your life? Civil aviation orders, CAO 100.5 tasks. Altimeter, we talked about that. We have a difference in altitudes, discrepancy, and then somebody thinks they're 500-foot different height to the others, and they're not. Airspeed indicator, same thing. If you haven't got the right airspeed on approach, then you're closer to the stall or more, or if you're too fast, you could float down the runway and hit the fence at the end. What if you're doing a forced landing and you haven't got the appropriate airspeed? Composite wooden propellers, again, if you've got not the right torque setting, then the propeller can wear, and then you can get vibration, which causes crankshaft vibration, which causes increased engine wear, which reduces the engine life, particularly with the Rotax. We run our Rotax at idle at 2200 RPM because the gearbox doesn't rattle as much as it does below 2000. So keep your RPM at least 2000 RPM taxiing on the ground and save yourself an $8,000 gearbox. Airworthiness directives and notices, Rotax ADs, we talked about that, pins, and there was another one recently about springs holding the helping to hold the carburetors from backward movement. Bushcat seatbelts, we'll talk about that one in a second, and RAOs AN. So this happened recently with our Bushcat seatbelt just come apart. The stitching just come apart. Great support from Errol and Mariette down at Gap Aero. They were on it really quickly and they helped us out so much. Good job. We submitted an OMS. RAOs were back to us within 24 hours and got an email out to all Bushcat owners advising them that they need to check the seatbelt before further flight. So overall, a really good outcome. The maintenance circle of safety worked quite well in this instance. And so now Bushcat owners are aware that there is a problem with the seatbelt. But if we didn't fill in an OMS and we didn't get the manufacturer involved and we didn't get let RAOs know, then other Bushcat owners could have been out there flying around with unsafe seatbelts. Very, very important. RAOs AN 270810-1. This amazes me. We get people come to fly at our flying school and we ask them if they know about the RAOs AN with regards to liquid-cooled engines. Now, a lot of them go, no, don't know anything about it. Okay, you need to read the ANs, including pilots. These are important. The Rotax cooling, the compression clamps, the constant compression clamps, if they're not located on the spigots for the inlet and outlet for the cylinder heads, you will get leaking. Now, it says before flight, check the engine hoses are correctly fitted. That needs to be done really before every flight. And I'll tell you why, because this is what happened to our Tecnam. This is not where the rubber hose attaches to the spigot for the inlet by the compression clamp. We were doing an inspection in accordance with the airworthiness notice, and one of our students found coolant leakage from this flange here. This is where it attaches into the top of the head. Now, this was the fourth flight of the day, so it wasn't the first flight of the day, it was the fourth flight of the day. And he diligently found that. It's pretty easy to see, and we tell our people, if you do an inspection on the engine and you see pink fairy floss floating around inside the aeroplane, then let us know, because there's a problem. Now, where that actually broke was inside the inlet, and that crack there was what caused that leakage. And that was located there. Item number 5 is the hose, and item number 8 is the clamp, and number 16 is the spigot there. That is what the airworthiness notice is talking about for the inspection, for the inlet and the outlet, down on items 16 and 8 on the bottom of the cylinder head there as well. But where the red arrow is where the break was. So that was a good job by our student for finding that. Maintenance programs, oil change hours versus calendar. Well, I'm going to have to accelerate here because I'm getting a bit too slow. If you have an hours and a calendar example, we had a guy who had an oil change due on hours and calendar, and he got the maintenance done, and then the maintainer forgot to sign off the maintenance release. And then 2 weeks later, somebody else took the aeroplane down because the calendar was due, and then they changed the oil again twice. Undercarriage overhaul limits. We had another aeroplane we were loading onto Breezy Log, and the manufacturer's schedule says overhaul the undercarriage every 2,000 hours. The aeroplane done about 6,000 hours in flight and was never overhauled. So that was a problem, 3 times the overhaul limit. So level 1 and level 2 maintainers, you need to know how to maintain the aeroplane in accordance with acceptable standards. I've met a couple of level 1 maintainers and level 2 maintainers. We encourage people to visit or just do a Google search, AC43-13 1B and 2B. It's a free download from the FAA, and it's this book here. And it's what CASA and the FAA accept as acceptable methods. It's going to tell you how to do everything for structures, NDT, corrosion protection, hardware, landing gear systems, repairs to fabric, how to do a weight and balance, electrical and avionics. If you want to know how to do something to an airworthiness standard, not just the old wire and chewing gum, it tells you in here. For example, you should not have electrical cables within a half an inch, like a conduit run within half an inch of a fuel line. That's the standard. But I see it all the time where aircraft wires are running cable tied to a fuel line. So this is an example of how to do the maintenance appropriately. So we've got an aircraft panel here. This is a skin of an airplane with double row of rivets on the left and the right. If we get a damage to that repair, we'll go to the AC43. We need to make sure that the person doing the repair is appropriately trained. Have you got the training for it? Do you have the data? So AC43 might tell you how to repair it. Do you have the appropriate tools? So a shift and spanner and a hammer is not the appropriate tooling. And do you have the right parts? Have you got the right metal? Is it aircraft grade aluminium? So only then, if we put these pieces together, we can make sure that we've completed an effective repair. There's a minimums checklist. Have a read of that. And if you're a private operator, you need to make sure that you keep a track of your flight sheets. If you don't have a maintenance plan and you're not filling in logbooks, you're just flying. You're not aviating. If you don't have any flight sheets and you just do an annual inspection, regardless of how many hours you fly, you're just flying. You're not aviating. And people who have flight sheets have a detailed maintenance plan, a good relationship with a maintenance organization or a well-trained level 2, then you're you're doing things well. Flight schools, renters, it's your ass in the aircraft. Ask how they track their maintenance, how long to the next service. Ask, are they keeping up to date with changes? And do they encourage you to find defects? We love it when our people find defects, just because it's safe. We don't like the bills, but that's part of the job. And do your own research about the aircraft you fly. So as a pilot, you might not be responsible for it, but your ass is in the airplane. If there's a problem with a fuel system and you're flying it, at least you're aware that what could be wrong. So keeping track of it all. Maintenance planning methods are just flick through the logbook until you see what was done last and give that a go. Put post-it notes all over the place. That's pretty permanent. Not. Excel spreadsheets are good, but if you're not keeping flight sheets, you can't update the hours. Or you can go full electronic. So CAO 100.5 tasks in our BreezyLog system. You log on. The current total time airframe is updated through your mobile phone app, and you finish a flight for 1 hour, it updates the total time airframe, and all of these CAO tasks are automatically updated by the system. So when you put an aircraft on BreezyLog, you'll have all of these tasks. We go through all of the CAO tasks and get the ones that are applicable for you. Airworthiness directives, they're all listed with quick links to the CASA website, so you don't have to open up another tab, and it's all color-coded for tracking, and you've got a proof of compliance. Maintenance programs, life schedules, this is all of the other stuff that's applicable from the aircraft maintenance manual and whatever else is continuing airworthiness requirements. On your dashboard, if you've got a fleet or one aircraft, it doesn't matter. The front page of your mobile phone or your computer, laptop or tablet is going to tell you when the next maintenance action is due, and these things will change color to give you an alert. Maintenance history, you can search by keywords and it's all written there. You can view the history and all that sort of thing. And we even track by ATA chapter for people who know what ATA chapters are. What's coming down the pipeline? We've got free BreezyLogs account for initial load for new aircraft. So if you buy an aeroplane from Foxbat or Technam, there's got a couple of other distributors on board. Just say, I want a free BreezyLog account so I can keep track of maintenance right from day one. Breezy MR, if you want to put your aircraft on BreezyLog, just give us your current MR or your next 12 months maintenance to your next annual, and we'll load it for free for you. BreezyLog Flight School Manager is in development. We're going to continue to level 1 and develop L2 training courses that are comprehensive and provide all the information you need for the different types of aircraft you're operating. If you own your own aeroplane and you have a level 1 and you just don't feel confident, come and give us a call. We'll arrange a 2-day assisted annual inspection. You fly your aeroplane into us and we'll help you plan, perform, and wind up your inspection and we'll give you training along the way. UPRT training for all members, and we're going to be putting out special deals for flight instructors so that we can get people safer in the air from upset recovery training. And here's the big one, guys and girls. From today, if you go to BreezyLog, my.breezylog.com and sign up, you get a free pilot's logbook for life. No cost. This is the dashboard of the logbook. It's very simple to add a flight, and you can keep a track of specialist activities. The report section includes being able to get your hours and landings and things for your renewal. This little icon in the top corner, if your aircraft's on BreezyLog and you close a flight, your pilot's logbook is automatically updated with all of the flight information. You just click on that air icon, choose the flight, validate it by pressing save, and your logbook's up to date. So it's seamless integration with no duplicate entries required. So free for life, electronic pilot logbook, my.breezylog.com. Sign up as a pilot or an aircraft owner or a maintainer. Just hit those buttons there, and you'll have a free pilot logbook that you can use for any aircraft that you're flying. Very simple to use. So fly safe, have fun. Cody, I think I went 2 minutes over. Sorry, mate.
No worries at all, Paul. Some really great information there. I'll see if I can bring your camera back in.
Oh, yep.
Oh, no. Can you hit your camera in? There we go. Thanks, Paul. That was, some fantastic information there. There are a few questions in the Q&A tab there on the right-hand side. Bilgin asked, are you saying that a maintainer can accept the owner-operator's responsibility?
Tell you whether that's an acceptable thing. But if somebody come to me and said, hey, I want you to look after my airplane, I really don't have time, or I don't know. I went to the Homer Simpson School of Aircraft. Put your aircraft on BreezyLog, fill in your flight hours on the app, and your responsibilities will be put up to date, because BreezyLog automatically interrogates the CASA website and updates the airworthiness directives for your aeroplanes and alerts you that there's a new airworthiness directive. And we're trying to do that with the manufacturers with service bulletins, and we'd like to do it with RAOs as well for the airworthiness notices, so that people are alerted and informed when there is a change rather than them having to go to find it. We have that technology available. So for your question, can the maintainer take the responsibility? No, I like, again, I'm not a lawyer. You could delegate the responsibility to him, but at the end of the day, you're still responsible.
I think that's key there, absolutely. Another question, and I think you covered it off throughout your presentation, are the Rotax service bulletins on the CASA website?
No, service bulletins. So for Rotax, airworthiness, so the way airworthiness directives operate is, again, the maintenance circle of safety. I've got a problem with the Rotax. I write an OMS or an SDR through the CASA website. This feeds back to Rotax, and they say, oh, yeah, that's the 75th time we've had a circlip break on the pin. We better do something about that. And they found a bad batch of pins or a bad batch of circlips. So they say to CASA, or CASA will call Rotax and say, hey, what are you doing about these circlips that are breaking? Yep, we've got this service bulletin. We'll put it out. Now, a service bulletin is how you comply with an airworthiness directive. An airworthiness directive is basically, hey, people, there's a problem with this part. You need to fix it by performing service bulletin ABC 123. And those service bulletins will be found on the Rotax website. So the airworthiness directive is a directive from the regulator. It's a legal document. If you don't comply with that and your airplane crashes because you didn't comply with it, you're going to go to jail or get a fine, or something bad's going to happen, right? So the service bulletin is what the manufacturer is saying how to fix it so you are compliant with the airworthiness directive. And there's a really good website called rotaxowners.com, and it's like $35 a year. And I tell you, it's the best $35. If you got a Rotax engine in your airplane, take that. There's videos. You get email alerts for service bulletins. You get a network of people to help you. It's the best $35 you'll spend.
Thanks, Paul. Another question here. I have an official factory maintenance manual. There's no spares list or exploded drawings. The manufacturer no longer exists. What can I do?
Okay, so if it's a registered aeroplane, you probably need to talk to CASA. If it's a recreational aeroplane, I would first touch base with Jared, send an email off, Jared and Darren. Honestly, depending upon the complexity of the aeroplane, I would first contact other people who had this type of aeroplane, and pool your resources and try, like I mentioned, the Victor Air Tourer group, right? So if you don't have the parts catalog, then you need to create one. Now, nuts, bolts, you got AN hardware, castellated nuts, nylock nuts. That's a no-brainer. You can pick them up from any good aircraft spares support shop. What's a problem is castings and particular molded parts. So if you break something like that, you may need to get it engineered so that it's made to an appropriate standard with the appropriate type of material. So if George wants to send me an email or something, we're more than happy to do that. That's what we're here for. This is why we built this. We've got experience and we want to help people who are not as fortunate to have the experience that we have. So if George wants to give us a call, but certainly find other people who have the same aeroplane and start putting your heads together and go from there.
Thanks, Paul. And final question that we've got there is, does the regulation allow delegation of responsibility of maintenance?
Is that similar to the one we asked before? Yeah. I'm not a lawyer, but you can agree to anything in this world so long as you document it and both people understand what's going on. But there are tools available now. One thing I didn't actually mention in there that I wanted to, because we're starting to run out of time, but some maintenance shops will have software for their workshop. It's called AeroTrack or there's another one, but it costs them. So it's $8,000 for the Cessna manuals, and then it might be a few $1,000s for a subscription to their maintenance tracking program. So when you take your aeroplane in there, they're going to do exactly what we do for BreezyLog, is they're going to load all of your previous scheduled maintenance actions into their software package, so that when you take it back, they'll go, oh, last year we did this. Then they have to research what's coming down the pipe since you did the last maintenance. But the killer is that their software in their workshop is not linked to your flying activity, whereas BreezyLog, you put a flight into your mobile phone or your tablet, then it updates your maintenance program. The workshop maintenance program does not know how many hours a year you do or how many landings you do or anything. So it's only updated when it gets updated, not as you fly.
Yeah, absolutely. I just had a message there from Jared in the background as well. So in the technical manual, there are some of the requirements as well. A flight training school has the ability to nominate a maintenance controller within their school, which in effect makes that person responsible for that maintenance. But that is only applicable for flight training schools, is my understanding. Ultimately, however, the owner-operator is still responsible for the continued airworthiness and the maintenance responsibilities there. So,
now that's cool. Just a note on that maintenance controller. I think that's cool. That's delegation of duty. But at the end of the day, the CFI or the CEO of the operating school would be the one ultimately, because, you know, the poop doesn't flow downhill, it goes back up to the top, right?
That's absolutely right. And it's really important, as you've covered here, that aircraft owners and their operators, such as schools, are aware of their maintenance requirements. You touch on some really key points throughout that presentation, particularly in relation to 100.5 compliance. Airspeed and altimeters and transponders are a common finding that we find in flight training school audits, as well as obviously service bulletin compliance. And they are safety critical findings if we identify them. And unfortunately, when we're auditing our schools, it's our most common reason to need to temporarily ground an aircraft if those things aren't completed as well. So some really great information there. For those still watching, in the handouts tab on the right-hand side, Paul has been kind enough to put much of that information together. But of course, if you want more information, please do go to the Flight Safety Solutions website. They are also running a promotion for National Safety Month. If you mention National Safety Month, they will look after you. And they've got a bunch of training opportunities there for aircraft owners and maintainers, as well as obviously their BreezyLog solutions that they ran through there. So that link should have popped up on your screen where you can go to their website. Please reach out to Paul, and they've got a range of solutions available for our members. So thank you so much, Paul. That was really valuable information, a fantastic presentation, and we really appreciate the continued support for National Safety Month.
Thanks, Cody. It's a privilege to work with you, mate, and keep up the good work, and fly safe, everyone.
Likewise. Thanks, Paul.
Bye.
Alrighty, guys. So thank you very much. That wraps up this presentation. We've got a little over time, but certainly worthwhile for the value of that content there. Once again, we'd like to thank all of our sponsors for National Safety Month with the more than $10,000 worth of giveaways that we've got across the month of October. And of course, to Flight Safety Solutions, who is a gold sponsor of National Safety Month and the sponsor for our presentations that you're seeing all throughout today. The next presentation slot is returning your Jabiru to flight. That is a pre-recorded session. It won't have any Q&A, but that will be going live in a minute's time. So if you jump over to that channel, you'll be able to watch that presentation with Jared and the team from Jabiru, who were kind enough to join us there. We've also got Garmin joining us at 1 o'clock this afternoon, who's another sponsor. And we've got a CASA presentation on ADS-B later on this afternoon at 2:15. So join us back for the rest of our presentations. Thanks for joining. It's really appreciated, and enjoy your day.
Stop.